Today on the BetaFiles, Hester Prynne, and my case for why she is the greatest female character ever written. Hang on to your diapies, babies. I'm the barber. This is the BetaFiles.
Play the BetaFiles podcast.
Here's the BetaFiles podcast.
How's it going? Today I'm going to do something. I'm going to start a series of videos, and they're not going to be regular or anything like that. They're going to be kind of all over the place depending on a couple of things like my job and, of course, how I'm feeling and what's going on in the real world. But I thought I would do something, and I wanted to do this originally a few times, that would shake things up a little bit and get into part of my passions, right? And of course, behind me, eventually I'm going to start doing videos where I'm doing something with the guitar. But this is my other passion, is literature. You know, I mean, I do this for a living. And today we're going to start off with The Scarlet Letter, one of my favorite books. I absolutely love this book. I tell my students, you know, if you're going to go into American literature, there are 5 novels that you have got to read. And the top 5 are The Scarlet Letter, Huck Finn, Moby Dick, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and of course Gatsby. And then the secondary tier from that, the next 5 would be Slaughterhouse-Five, White Noise, Catch-22, Beloved, and Gravity's Rainbow. No, oh God, the Cormac McCarthy one. Cormac McCarthy. Blah. The Road. Okay. So those, you would read those, and you would also, there's also a handful over to the side, like The Sun Also Rises, The Sound of the Fury, Absalom. You hear me and Jay talk about those 2 books a lot. Also The Old Man and the Sea, Black Boy, The Age of Innocence. So now I'm just scanning my bookshelf. To Kill a Mockingbird, Roots would be a good one to read. So you get an idea. There's a ton of books out there that need to be read. The Grapes of Wrath of Mice and Men. The Winter of Our Discontent. Steinbeck's last novel, which in my opinion is one of his best works. That was a phenomenal book. But we're going to talk about The Scarlet Letter, okay, on this one. And mainly we're going to look at the beginnings, or the earlier part of the novel, where she comes out, where they bring her out, and the way Hawthorne sets this up. And it's through this one passage, and there's other things she does throughout the novel. I don't have time to go over it in a 45 to 50 minute podcast to go through this entire novel and explain my whole argument. But I can start the argument, so then you can go and look and find more evidence as you go through the novel itself and just look at her actions and the things that she does. But she is just phenomenal. She's a phenomenal character. And the strength that Hawthorne gives her is pretty amazing. One of the essays I wrote in as an undergrad was actually this idea that Hawthorne inserts himself into the novel to protect her as she tries to navigate through this Puritan world. Since I wrote that paper, and I wrote that paper 20 years ago, since I've written that paper, I realized that was actually not a well thought out argument, because in the moments where I argued that Hawthorne inserts himself as Dimmesdale and curtails the plot of the novel from where she gets hurt by the Puritans. She's actually wielding power over Dimmesdale at that moment. So Hawthorne's not inserting himself, he's yielding to her. That's a pretty powerful woman, where the author himself is yielding to her. And the idea of that comes from the fact that if you go through the Custom House, he obsesses over her. She takes control of him before he even fills her out in his mind, and fleshes her out as a character. He admits that in the Custom House. He admits how he just could not get her out of his head. And he didn't know who she was. He's, several hundred years removed from her story, and he's trying to imagine her. And the more he does, the more she consumes him, the stronger she becomes. And then, of course, when we get to the novel itself, he immediately shows just how strong that she is. So it's a powerful book. It's one that we shouldn't stop reading. I know that one of the reasons why I started teaching it in my classes is because I felt that they weren't reading it enough in high school, that the students I was getting coming into Guilford Tech and at A&T and at High Point, when I was over at High Point, they weren't reading the Scarlet Letter in high school, and so it was breaking my heart because they needed to read this book. This is a really great book, and regardless of what's happening with social justice or critical race or anything like that, the Scarlet Letter is a wonderful tale of subverting the American culture and subverting the ills of American culture and overpowering it until the end. Okay, and that's where the irony kicks in, and Hawthorne shows the real injustice of the entire novel when she dies and they still put the Scarlet Letter on her grave. So they mark her even in death. And of course his true comment about that is, or his real statement about that is simply that, no matter how hard you push back, the system is going to continue. The system's going to move on. And so it's a dark ending to this story, but the rest of the story itself is actually really enlightening and very powerful as far as her character goes, okay, and how strong she becomes. So we'll start with the first chapter of the book, which is called simply The Prison Door. Now, I skipped over the Custom House, which is the opening of the novel. And when you go to read the Scarlet Letter, you have to read the whole thing. You got to read the Custom House so that you understand what he's doing. And he's doing some really great stuff. Maybe one day I'll do a video just on the Custom House and explain how he sets this novel up, because he does something extremely cool for a 19th century writer, that whether he realized he did this or not, when you catch on to what happens, it's amazing. But I could go on for hours about that. Just that one simple trick that he does between the ending of the Custom House and the beginning of the first chapter. So we get to the first chapter of The Prison Door, and basically what Hawthorne's doing is laying out, just the description of how, or what we're looking at. And of course it's the prison that she's been held in for like 6 months, okay? And we're guesstimating with the 6 months. The way I tell my students, we figure this out. Well, actually, it's longer than 6 months. It's about 9 months that we're talking that she's in the prison, and that's banking on she starts to show around 3 months. Okay, and so now they find out that she's pregnant. Once they find out she's pregnant because it's through adultery, they know that she has slept with somebody. Then they put her in jail. And of course, this being the Puritans. All right. And that's the key to understanding. This is all Puritan law. This is not English law, okay, or American law, because America doesn't exist at this point. It's all Puritan law, okay? So they put her in jail, where she spends the last 6 months of her pregnancy and at least, at minimum, the first 3 months of the child's life, okay? because when they come out, again, this is guesstimates, and I'm sure there are lots of scholars out there that have actually pinpointed the exact timeline, but guesstimating this child is about 3 months old when she comes out. She's in there for at most 9 months. She's in prison. And so we open the novel. The opening scene of the novel is the prison door itself and the crowd that is gathering around the prison door itself, and how the town, the Puritans of the town, are starting to raise a little bit of a commotion, not a negative commotion, but they're getting ready to bring her out. They know they're going to bring her out. They know this is the day that they're going to pass judgment on her. Then we go to number 2. Chapter number 2 talks about the moment where she's actually going to come out. Leading up to that, Hawthorne sets it up with these little mini vignettes of people around the square, and that's what makes it fun. And he says about a half a page into the third or second chapter, he says, "It was a circumstance to be noted on the summer morning when our story begins its course that the women, of whom there were several in the crowd, appeared to take a peculiar interest in whatever penal infliction might be expected to ensue." In other words, there is a group of women that have gathered together with themselves to see what they're going to do to Hester. The age had not so much refinement that any sense of impropriety restrained the wearers of petticoat and farthingale from stepping forth into the public ways and wedging their not unsubstantial persons, if occasion were, into the throng nearest to the scaffold at an execution. Morally, as well as materially, there was a coarser fiber in those wives and maidens of old English birth and breeding than in their fair descendants, separated from them by a series of 6 or 7 generations. For throughout that chain of ancestry, every successive mother has transmitted to her child a fainter bloom, a more delicate and briefer beauty, and a slighter physical frame, if not a character of less force and solidity than her own. The women who were now standing about the prison door stood within less than half a century of the period when the man like Elizabeth had been the not altogether unsuitable representative of the sex. They were her countrywomen, and the beef and ale of their native land, with a moral diet not a whit more refined, entered largely into their composition. The bright morning sun therefore shone on broad shoulders, well-developed busts, and on round and ruddy cheeks that had ripened in the far-off island and had hardly yet grown paler or thinner in the atmosphere of New England. This was, moreover, a boldness and rotundity of speech among these matrons, excuse me, as most of them seem to be, that would startle us at present day, whether in respect to its purport or its volume of tone. All right, so what's going on in this particular paragraph is he is starting to build a physical juxtaposition that you're going to end up seeing when Hester comes out. All right. On top of that, they're gossips. He points out the gossipy nature of the women. So they're plump. Okay. He notes the broad shoulders. He notes the rosy cheeks, the thick cheeks. Okay, so they are, as Tom Hanks said on Saturday Night Live in that one skit, they're healthy gals. Okay, so they're healthy gals. All right, put it that way. They're also, as you go through this paragraph and you keep reading how he's describing them, they're also average. Okay? And he's slowly getting you to understand that. Then he goes into the gossip that they're telling. "Good wives," said a hard-featured dame of 50. Okay, so an older one. She is going, because of her age and because of her hard features, she has obviously got power over the group. Okay, she's the voice of the group. "I'll tell ye a piece of my mind," she says. It would be greatly for the public behoof if we women, being of mature age and church members in good repute, should have the handling of such malefactresses as this Hester Prynne. What think ye, gossips? If the hussy stood up for judgment before us 5 that are now here in a knot together, would she come off with such a sentence as the worshipful magistrates have awarded? Marry, I trow not. So she is immediately starting the conversation or the gossip by saying that the men have not done enough. That's the point of this speech by her. They haven't done enough. People say, said another, that the Reverend Master Dimsdale, her godly pastor, takes it very grievously to heart that such a scandal should have come upon his congregation. Now we're adding to the sentiment of the hardened dame of 50, right? She says they haven't done enough, and then the other says, look at her own preacher. He's really burdened by what has happened with this woman. And of course, if you read on, you find out why he's so burdened. The magistrates are God-fearing gentlemen, but mercifully... let me start over. The magistrates are God-fearing gentlemen, but merciful over much. That is a truth. Added a third autumnal matron. Autumnal meaning she's a little bit older. At the very least, they should have put the brand of a hot iron on Hester Prynne's forehead. Madam Hester would have winced at that, I warrant me, but she, the naughty baggage, little will she care that they put upon the what they put upon the bodice of her gown. Why, look you, she may cover it with a brooch, or such like heathenish adornment, and so walk the streets as brave as ever. What's really cool about this particular passage is, number one, the first two say they haven't done enough. Look at what it's doing to the clergy itself. It's embarrassing the clergy. It's put this unnecessary burden on the clergy. Then we get to this lady, and she's like, yeah, they haven't done enough. They should have put a brand on her forehead. Hurt her. Physical pain. A physical pain that won't go away. Instead, they're making her do a letter on her gown. And what she complains is she could do it small enough that she could cover it with a brooch. That is key because of what ends up happening here in just a little bit when they bring her out. He's setting this all up to what he's already doing in this early portion of the chapter is constructing her. He's constructing her in your mind. He's already setting up these points of juxtaposition that she is going to go against when they bring her out. Okay? Small letter, they should have put it on her forehead. Ah, but, interposed more softly a young wife holding a child by the hand. Let her cover the mark as she will. The pang of it will always be in her heart. Now, this younger one actually has some humility to her. And she says, let her cover whatever. Let her try to ignore it. It's always there. It's always going to be on her heart. So the only one of them that's making sense. And then we have the last one to speak. Okay, the fifth one. What do we talk of marks and brands, whether on the bodice of her gown or the flesh of her forehead? Cried another female, the ugliest as well as the most pitiless of these self-constituted judges. All right. He's already set up the other four to be very homely, very average, broad shoulders, puffy cheeks, healthy women, okay? Then we get the ugliest one of all, and it's not ironic that she's the last. She's the last on purpose. He's drawing attention to looks. He's putting a real emphasis on how these women look. Now, before I go any further, it's not that it's not one of those moments where Hawthorne is distinguishing and saying that, ugly women are just plain average women. That's not what he's doing, okay? He's using the physical appearances of the women to set up that they are just everyday women. This is the crowd. Everyday people, right? Average Joes. Again, he's constructing her so that she's going to stand out. And she will stand out because she's Hester Prynne, right? She continues, "This woman has brought shame upon us all and ought to die." So the ugliest of the women wants the most severe punishment. So the ugliness could be physical, or it could be the ugliness here, right? In the heart and in the soul. "Is there not law for it? There truly is, both in the scripture and the statute book. Then let the magistrates who have made it of no effect thank themselves if their own wives and daughters go astray." So now what she's saying is kill her, or all the other little girls and all the other women that are maturing right now will see what happened to Hester, and they'll go and screw everything else. They're going to go and have just crazy sex everywhere, and everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. That's her argument. It's a great argument. Typical Puritan argument. All right. Then here we go. I'm going to skip the next paragraph and get straight to the reveal. "The door of the jail being flung open from within, there appeared in the first place, like a black shadow emerging into the sunshine, the grim and grisly presence of the town beadle, with a sword by his side and his staff of office in his hand. This personage is prefigured and represented in his aspect the whole dismal severity of the puritanical code of law, which it was his business to administer in its final and closest application to the offender." Here again, Hawthorne is using the look to represent something metaphorical. And in this case, the metaphor is the darkness, the soullessness of the puritanical code. Okay? How it's rigid, how it's strict, how it does not allow for humanity, right? And humanity in the sense of our wants, our desires, our pleasures, that kind of thing. It doesn't allow for that. So that's what he's doing with this moment. Again, using the looks. That's why it's important to pay attention to how he describes Hester, because it's so good. All right, here we go. "Stretching forth the official staff in his left hand, he laid his right upon the shoulder of a young woman, whom he thus drew forward, until, on the threshold of the prison door, she repelled him by an action marked with natural dignity and force of character, and stepped into the open air as if by her own free will." The first thing that Hester Prynne does in the entire novel is, as soon as light hits her, the beadle's got his hand on her shoulder to bring her out, and she throws it off. The very first thing she does, before you even know what she looks like, Hester Prynne is throwing off the authority that the Puritans have on her. She will do this on her own. She will stand before the crowd by herself. That's what she's doing. Okay? It's going to do it again. Hold on. And go. No. Okay. All right. So that's the first thing you see. This is, again, my case is, or my argument is that this is, Hester Prynne is, in my opinion, the strongest woman ever in the history of female characters. And point number one, the first thing you see her do is reject authority. "She bore in her arms a child, a baby of some 3 months old, who winked and turned aside its little face from the too vivid light of day, because its existence heretofore had brought it acquainted only with the gray twilight of a dungeon or other darksome apartment of the prison." So the first thing you see is Hester throw off the authority. The second thing you see is Pearl. Now, you don't know it's her name is Pearl yet. That comes a little bit later. But you see Pearl wince from the light, because she has spent her entire life up to this point in a dark prison. She's not used to seeing this much light. So the child is turning to take away from that, okay? And this is metaphorical too, because Pearl is the the physical embodiment of the quote-unquote sin of adultery. It's key to note also, let's go ahead and talk about the letter real quick. The letter A stands for adultery, okay? If you didn't know that, obviously you didn't read this in high school or you slept through the class, because that's all they talk about. But the other key important thing to remember is the word adultery never shows up in this entire book. Throughout the entire novel, not once does Hawthorne use the word adultery. He alludes to it, he alludes to the sin, but he does not actually talk about the act of adultery, okay? He nudges you towards it. And because of that, what he's basically telling you is that the sin is unimportant, okay? Because the sin is manifest in the child. What do you do with the sin once you're manifesting this child? Well, you do your best to teach the child, and you get forgiveness and you get regeneration from that sin by making sure the child, who's the physical embodiment of the sin, to grow up and become a healthy, intelligent, moral being, which is what Hester sets out to do. Anyway, but at this first moment, of course, the child, being the manifestation of the sin, tries to curl up, tries to get away from what's going on in front of them. And Hester does the same thing for a brief second. She winces. When the young woman, the mother of this child, stood fully revealed before the crowd, it seemed to be her first impulse to clasp the infant closely to her bosom, not so much by an impulse of motherly affection as that she might thereby conceal a certain token which was wrought or fastened into her dress. Okay, now, first thing you see, she comes out, she rejects authority. Pearl sees sunlight for the first time and she winces. She turns her head. Then the third action is that after Pearl has turned away, Hester brings her, because the one thing that marks all of this, not the child, but the actual letter A that's on her breast, she can cover with Pearl. She even recoils for a brief moment. She does what, if you go back and read novels from the 19th century, she does exactly the way, she does exactly what women were supposed to do, or women were expected to do in a moment of heavy anxiety and fear, and that is to recoil because they're not strong enough. And then Hawthorne flips the script. So he gives you what you think, okay, this is natural from a woman. She's going to cover everything up and she's not going to own it. And then she pulls what I would like to call, she pulls a Hester Prynne. Okay? In a moment, however, wisely, judging that one token of her shame would but poorly serve to hide another, she took the baby on her arm, and with a burning blush and yet a haughty smile and a glance that would not be abashed, looked around at her townspeople and neighbors. On the breast of her gown, in fine red cloth, surrounded with an elaborate embroidery and fantastic flourishes of gold thread, appeared the letter A. It was so artistically done, and with so much fertility and gorgeous luxuriance of fancy, that it had all the effect of a last and fitting decoration to the apparel which she wore, and which was of a splendor in accordance with the taste of the age, but greatly beyond what was allowed by the sumptuary regulations of the colony. Okay, so she recoils. Hawthorne gives us that moment where she acts like a woman in a 19th century novel. And then she says no. And she pulls the child down and puts the child on her arm so that everyone could see on her chest, right here, this elaborate, very large letter A that she embroidered herself. And what's interesting is, in the custom house, he describes finding the A, and he talks about how he had taken it to a few people to see if they could reverse engineer it, and they couldn't. So the A itself is masterfully embroidered, okay? This thing is unbelievable, all right? Remember what the old lady were saying, what the old ladies were saying, that she was going to have a small little just A, and she would cover it up with a brooch so that people wouldn't see it. Hester's doing the exact opposite. She's not only leaving it to where you can see it, she does it so beautifully and so amazingly, right? And it's adorned so wonderfully that that you can't help but look at it and say, wow. The other thing that kills me about this, that I love, not kills me, but I love, she took the baby on her arm with a burning blush and yet a haughty smile and a glance that would not be abashed, looked around at her townspeople and neighbors. She takes the baby down so they can see the A, and then she grins at them and looks at all of them. She sweeps the crowd. Oh. Now we get to probably my favorite part of the whole chapter, where he actually describes her. The full description of Hester Prynne, and she is hot. All right. He says, she had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of feature and richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. So she had long dark hair. Now remember, she's been in prison for at least 9 months, and yet her hair is gorgeous. And it's shiny, clean. It's like shining. So it's throwing off the sun. Okay, remember what we talked about with those other women, those 5 other women. He paints them as average. This is why he was painting them as average, because he's getting ready to bring out Helen of Troy, basically, okay? She was ladylike, too, after the manner of the feminine gentility of those days, so he basically adds royalty on top of it. She is not like the others of the crowd that are, again, average. These are regular, average, everyday women. She is genteel. She is of a higher blood. I missed it. Characterized by a certain state and dignity rather than by the delicate, evanescent, and indescribable grace which is now recognized as its indication. And never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike in the antique interpretation of the term than as she issued from the prison. Those who had before known her and had expected to behold her dimmed and obscured by a disastrous cloud were astonished and even startled to perceive how her beauty shone out and made a halo of the misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. This is my favorite part that I teach students. She's glowing. She's literally glowing. Like, literally glowing. They expect her to come out all gloom and doom and hunched over. And what she does, she puts the child on her arm. She stands up straight. And as she's walking toward the platform that they're going to put her on, she carries herself with grace and dignity. And because of that, it makes her glow. Oh. Her attire, which indeed she had wrought for the occasion in prison, and had modeled much after her own fancy, seemed to express the attitude of her spirit, the desperate recklessness of her mood by its wild and picturesque peculiarity. But the point which drew all eyes, and as it were transfigured the wearer, so that both men and women who had been familiarly acquainted with Hester Prynne were now impressed as if they beheld her for the first time, was that scarlet letter. And he actually writes it in all caps. Scarlet letter. So fantastically embroidered and illuminated upon her breast, it had the effect of a spell, taking her out of the ordinary relations with humanity and enclosing her in a sphere by herself. Her actions, her brief moment, and then she turns and stands up straight and walks on. She's showing strength that even women in the 1850s, when he writes this, even women then did not have the ability to show in society. The second biggest reason why I honestly believe that she is the strongest, greatest female character ever written is when they get her up on the platform and they start questioning her. Hester Prynne, said the clergyman, I have striven with my young brother here, under whose preaching of the word you have privilege to sit. Here Mr. Wilson laid his hand on the shoulder of a pale young man beside him. I have sought, I say, to persuade this godly youth that he should deal with you here in the face of heaven and before these wise and upright rulers and in the learning of all the people as touching the vileness and blackness of your sin. Knowing your natural temper better than I, he could the better judge what arguments to use, whether of tenderness or terror, such as might prevail over your hardness and obstinacy, insomuch that you should no longer hide the name of him who tempted you to this grievous fall. But he opposes me with the young man's over softness, albeit wise beyond his years, that it were wronging the very nature of women to force her to lay upon her heart's secrets in such a broad daylight and in presence of so great a multitude. Truly, as I sought to convince him, the shame lay in the commission of the sin, and not in the showing of it forth. Well, say you to it once again, Brother Dimsdale, must it be thou or I that shalt deal with this poor sinner's soul? There was a murmur among the dignified and reverend occupants of the balcony, and the Governor Bellington gave expression to its purports, speaking in an authoritative voice, although tempered with respect towards the youthful clergyman whom he addressed. Good Master Dimsdale, said he, the responsibility of this woman's soul lies greatly with you. Excuse me. It behooves you, therefore, to exhort her to repentance and to confession as a proof and consequence thereof. So they're telling Dimsdale, get up here and question this woman. And so the Reverend Mr. Dimsdale bent his head in silent prayer as it seemed, and then came forward. Hester Prynne, said he, leaning over the balcony and looking down steadfastly into her eyes, thou hearest what this good man says, and seest the accountability under which I labor. If thou feelest it to be for thy soul's peace, and that thy earthly punishment will thereby be made more effectual to salvation, I charge thee to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner and fellow sufferer. Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him, for believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee on the pedestal of shame, yet better were it so than to hide a guilty heart through life. What can thy silence do for him, except it tempt him, yea, compel him, as it were, to add hypocrisy to sin? Heaven hath granted thee an open ignominy that thereby thou mayest work out an open triumph over the evil within thee and sorrow without. All right, so spoiler alert. Dimsdale's the one who gets her pregnant. So what Dimsdale says, and this line is so wonderful. Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him, for believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee on the pedestal of shame, ye better were it so than to hide a guilty heart throughout life. He's saying, speak the name of your accomplice, the man who gave you the child. And being who he is, he will come down and stand beside you. Because God will make sure that he does, right? Now that's what the people are hearing. What Hester's hearing is, say my name, and I promise you I will come stand with you. And I will bear the brunt of my sin. What's important to understand here is that Hawthorne is again playing with a trope that during this period in time is used a lot in the novels. Let the woman confess, not the man, because now it's an accusation. It's harder for a woman to confess without it being an accusation than a man to confess without it being an accusation. The minute she speaks the name of the male, it is an accusation seen by the church because, again, she is a second-class citizen next to the males of the colony. So what does she do? Even the poor baby at Hester's bosom was affected by the same influence, for it directed its hitherto vacant gaze towards Mr. Dimmesdale and held up its little arms with a half-pleased, half-plaintive murmur. So Pearl, hearing Dimmesdale speak, reaches out her arms toward him, which, of course, again, Pearl is the embodiment of the sin. The sin is speaking to the one who committed the sin. So powerful seemed the minister's appeal that the people could not believe, but that Hester Prynne would speak out the guilty name. So everybody around was like, "Oh God, she's going to tell. Here we go, gossip time." Or else that the guilty one himself, in whatever high or lowly place he stood, would be drawn forth by an inward or inevitable necessity and compelled to ascend the scaffold. In other words, Dimmesdale's speech is so moving towards Hester that they're like, well, she's either going to spill the beans, or whoever this dude is going to have so much guilt that he's going to come down there and stand with her. And so everybody's waiting. And the next line is one of the reasons why I say she is so awesome. Hester shook her head. She doesn't say a word. She goes, all right. And then Mr. Wilson gets angry. And he says, "Woman, transgress not beyond the limits of heaven's mercy," cried the Reverend Mr. Wilson more harshly than before. "That little babe hath been gifted with a voice to second and confirm the counsel which thou hast heard. Speak out the name, that and thy repentance may avail to take the scarlet letter off thy breast." This next section, this next brief section is truly her strongest moment of the entire novel. And it tells you everything you need to know about this woman. "Never," replied Hester Prynne, looking not at Mr. Wilson, but into the deep and troubled eyes of the young clergyman. Now she's talking directly to Dimmesdale. There are two conversations happening simultaneously between Dimmesdale and Hester, and then Dimmesdale and Hester in the crowd. You have this joint conversation that the entire congregation that is brought there to witness this public shaming of this woman. And then you have the silent conversation in code between Dimmesdale and Hester. He's thrown her the gauntlet and said, "Speak my name and I'll come stand with you." And this is her response to what he says. "It is too deeply branded, you cannot take it off, and would I might endure his agony as well as mine." "I will not speak," answered Hester, turning pale as death, but responding to this voice, which she too surely recognized. "And my child must seek a heavenly father. She shall never know an earthly one." You cannot take, it is too deeply branded, the scarlet letter. You cannot take it off. And would that I might endure his agony as well as mine. Dimmesdale gives her the option to confess. "Speak my name and I will come down." Again, the minute she does that, it becomes accusation. It's not a confession anymore. It's an accusation. And what Hester tells him in return is, "No, I will not." And basically what happens is she throws it back on him to say, You will live with your sin. I am dealing with mine. And she says, I will even keep my mouth shut and carry your sin for you, your burden for you. But I will never speak your name. I will never give in. Of course, at the end of the novel, he finally confesses. After it literally physically, again, spoilers, it physically tears him apart. The guilt. This is why I think she's the strongest, most incredible female character of all time. And there is so many, like I said, there are so many. We were only, we're not that far in. There are so many examples of Hester Prynne and her awesomeness. You can have your Wonder Woman. All right, that's fine. You can have your strong female characters from wherever, right? Princess Leia, Rey. Give me Hester Prynne. I'll take Hester Prynne over all of them any day. All right. So we'll stop it there because I looked down and I'm already 45 minutes in. So we'll cut it there. I want to do this more. This was fun. Usually I do this. I teach this book in my sophomore composition class. I teach this book over a week and a half. In my American Lit class this semester, I'll spend a day on it. And we'll be talking about that section. Believe me. We'll also be talking about another very important section when she takes Pearl to the governor's mansion. And she once again turns and tells, at this point, she turns and tells Dimsdale, stand up for me. Again, that's that thing where, as I was saying in the earlier part of the video, she is dictating the actions around her, not the other way around. It's pretty important to understand when you look at Hester. If you've never read The Scarlet Letter, do yourself a favor and read The Scarlet Letter. It is a fantastic book. It's such a great story. And hopefully, as I demonstrated in just the little time that I was able to demonstrate, she is a really awesome woman. She is an incredibly strong and powerful woman. The next one of these I'll do, we'll just see we'll see what I feel like, okay? Because there are so many books I want to talk about. And so, like I said, I'm going to make this a continuous thing. That'll be fun. So every once in a while, you'll get a book. Or a character. Really, I'm into characters. I'm not much into the overall narratives. Are really cool, but I love characters. Characters are awesome. I love characters so much. An old friend of mine got me for Christmas one year a book, and it's called The Complete Cast of Characters, and it's an attempt to catalog every fictional character in American and British literature. Which is fantastic because there are so many great characters. My favorite character of all time is Quentin Compson, which is Faulkner's creation. I also love when we talk about villains. Of course, immediately in this day and age, when we talk about villains, we talk about Darth Vader and the Joker, right? The Joker is just anarchy for anarchy, right? Darth Vader is complete control of the galaxy. But the greatest villain of all time, if you want to really see a really good villain, read Othello and introduce yourself to Iago. Because Iago is the ultimate villain. Cruella de Vil, Maleficent, Vader, Joker, none of them got anything on Iago. He is truly the personification of evil in literature. Okay? Check out all these things. It's so much fun. So, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to keep doing this every so often. Just for a break and just so I can do something that I truly enjoy doing. And that is just telling people about things that happen in literature. So go read The Scarlet Letter. I promise you, it's not as boring as you remember it to be in high school. High school makes a lot of novels boring. And so I hate that about high school, right? But again, it's not really the high school teacher's fault. There are a lot of factors. So make it a great day. Be safe. I am the barber. This has been the Beta Files. Peace. Oh, shoot. Let me do that again. I'm going to start over. Okay. Make it a great day. Be safe. And always remember, sun comes up, there's opportunity. So make sure you take it. Okay? I'm the barber. And this really has been the Beta Files.